A struggling single dad brought his daughter's favorite leftovers to the construction site where he worked. What he didn't know was that the new intern who asked to share his lunch was the billionaire owner of the entire company. And she was about to change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the morning air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of sawdust and wet concrete. Leo tightened his grip on the worn strap of the lunchbox, feeling the familiar weight of it against his leg. Inside, nestled in a faded plastic container, were last night's leftover spaghetti with a simple tomato sauce. It was his daughter, Maya's favorite. He'd made a double batch, just so she could have some for her own lunch, and he could have the rest for his. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it tasted like home. Something he desperately needed these days. He nodded to the bride foreman, a man named Rick, whose smile never quite reached his eyes, and made his way to the half-finished shell of what would one day be a luxury condominium tower. The skeleton of the building rose against the gray sky, a monument to a world he would never belong to. He worked here, he built its bones, but he would never see the inside. Once the glass walls were up and the polished marble floors were laid, Leo was a carpenter, a good one. His hands calloused and steady, knew the Plaza's Nadia we language of wood better than he knew most people. He could build a perfect frame, a seamless joint, a staircase that felt solid as the earth itself. But he couldn't build a savings account. He couldn't fix the rattling engine in his Passas 10-year-old car. And he couldn't stop the quiet fear that crept in late at night when the bills on the kitchen table seemed to multiply in the dim light. His boots crunched on the gravel as he found his usual spot, a stack of drywall sheets tucked away from the wind and the noise. He sat down, opened his lunchbox, and breathed in the faint smell of garlic and oregano. It was a small comfort, but it was his. He heard the other workers gathering nearby, their laughter, loud and easy, as they unwrapped burgers from greasy paper bags and cracked open cans of soda. Leo kept his head down, pretending not to notice the way their eyes sometimes flickered. To his humble meal, he was used to it, the quiet judgment, the unspoken pity. He'd learned to wear it like a second skin, something he could shrug off even when it felt heavy. That's when he saw her. She was new, an intern, maybe someone from the corporate office sent to learn the ropes. She was standing near a pile of lumber, holding a clipboard and looking completely out of place. Her clothes were simple, a plain gray jacket and clean work boots, but they fit her with a quiet elegance that a construction site couldn't diminish. Her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her eyes were sharp, observant, taking everything in without saying a word. He'd seen her watching him before, not with the same dismissive glances as the others, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. He ignored it, just like he ignored everything else. But today was different. Today, she started walking toward him, her steps sure and steady on the uneven ground, and Leo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know why, but her presence felt more intimidating than the entire crew combined. She stopped a few feet away, and for a moment just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice calm and clear, and it cut through the noise of the construction site like a bell. "Smells good," she said. "Mind if I join you?" The woman's question hung in the air between them, simple but unexpected. Leo looked up from his plastic container, his fork halfway to his mouth. He hadn't expected her to speak to him at all, let alone ask to share his quiet corner of the construction site. He glanced around at the other workers who were now watching them with open curiosity, their own conversations tapering off into silence. He felt a flush of heat rise up his neck, a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something he couldn't quite name. She was still standing there waiting for an answer, her gaze steady and unwavering. There was no pity in her eyes, no condescension, just a simple directness that was both disarming and unnerving. He swallowed the knot in his throat and gestured to the empty space on the drywall stack beside him. "Be my guest," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened the edges of her face, and sat down, tucking her legs neatly to the side. She didn't have a lunch of her own, just the clipboard, which she placed on the ground beside her. "I'm Clara, by the way," she said, extending a hand. Her nails were clean, unpolished, her grip surprisingly firm. "Leo," he replied, shaking it briefly. Before retreating back to his lunch, they sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds, the distant whine of a saw, and the clinking of Leo's fork against the plastic. "So what's on the menu?" "Today?" Clara asked, her tone light, trying to bridge the gap between them. "Spaghetti," he said, feeling the need to explain. "It's my daughter's favorite." A flicker of something passed through Clara's eyes. Interest, maybe, or something deeper. "You have a daughter?" "Yeah, Maya. She's 8, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth without his permission. "She's the reason I do all this," he gestured vaguely. At the rising structure, the dust, the noise, the long hours. "She's a good kid." "I'm sure she is." "Clara," said her voice softer. Now, she didn't ask more questions. She just sat there sharing the quiet with him as he ate his leftovers, and for the first time all day Leo didn't feel like the poor carpenter eating alone, and felt like a man having lunch with a woman, who for some reason chose to be there, and that simple act of choosing felt more valuable than any fancy meal he could have imagined. He didn't know who she was or what she wanted, but as he finished the last of his spaghetti, he found himself hoping she'd be there again tomorrow. The next day, she was there again. This time she brought her own lunch, a simple salad, in a clear container and a bottle of water. She found him at the same spot on the drywall stack and sat down without asking, as if they had an unspoken arrangement. Leo had brought leftovers again. This time, a hearty beef stew he'd made the night before. It was cheap filling and reminded him of his Pruss grandmother's kitchen. He felt a little less self-conscious today as he opened the container, the rich aroma filling the cold air around them. "Stew today, huh?" Clara said with a smile. "You're a man of many talents." "Or a man with a tight budget and a slow cooker," he countered with a wry grin. She laughed, and the sound was warm and easy. It made him relax a little more. "So what's the story with you?" he asked, taking a bite of stew. "Intern?" She nodded, stirring her salad with a plastic fork. "Something like that. My family's in the business. I'm supposed to be learning how things work from the ground up." It was a plausible story, one that explained her clean clothes and her quiet confidence. Leo accepted it without question. "Well, you picked a tough place to start," he said. "This job isn't for the faint of heart." "I'm not faint of heart," she replied, and he believed her. They fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next week. Their lunchtime meetings became a small island of calm in the chaotic sea of the construction site. They talked about little things: the weather, the news, the impossible traffic on the interstate. Leo found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He told her about Maya's obsession with drawing dragons, about the leaky faucet in his apartment he couldn't seem to fix, and about his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago from an illness that came on too fast and left a hole in his life that he was still learning how to live around. Clara listened. She never interrupted, never offered easy platitudes or empty reassurances. She just listened with a kind of focused attention that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in a very long time. He learned less about her. She was guarded about her family, offering only vague details about demanding parents, and a life that had always felt a little too planned out. She spoke of a world of boardrooms and expectations, a world so different from his that it felt like another planet. But when she was sitting on that drywall stack with him, she wasn't an heiress or an intern. She was just Clara, and he was just Leo, and for an hour each day that was enough. One afternoon, as they were finishing their lunch, Leo pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a drawing Maya had made for him, a lopsided, smiling sun with the words, "My daddy is the best builder." Scribbled underneath in crayon, he smoothed it out on his knee, a proud smile on his face. "She's got a future as an WWW artist," he said. Clara leaned over to look at it, her shoulder brushing his lightly. "She's right, you know," she said, her voice soft. "You are." Leo looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world around them faded away, the noise of the saws, the shouts of the other workers. The cold wind, it all disappeared, leaving just the two of them in a quiet space filled with the smell of leftover stew and the fragile beginnings of something he was too afraid to name. The routine became the best part of Leo's day. The bell for lunch would ring, and he'd feel a quiet hum of anticipation as he made his way to their spot. He started packing a little extra in his lunchbox. A second piece of fruit, a handful of cookies, just in case Clara forgot hers again. She often did. He found out she was terrible at planning her own meals, a skill she admitted she'd never had to learn. He found it endearing, this small imperfection in her otherwise composed demeanor. It made her feel more real, more human one rainy afternoon. The site was a mess of mud and slick surfaces. They huddled under a makeshift tarp. Leo had rigged up, sharing a thermos of hot coffee he'd brought from home. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the plastic above them, creating a small, private world just for the two of them. "I don't think I've ever had coffee from a thermos before," Clara admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm mug he gave her. "It's usually served by someone in a uniform on a silver tray." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Silver trays, huh? You're missing out. This is the good stuff." She took a sip, and her eyes widened in mock surprise. "You're right, it's surprisingly not terrible." He laughed, and the sound echoed in their little, rain-soaked sanctuary. "So what do you really think of all this?" he asked, gesturing to the mud and the half-finished building. "The chaos, the noise, the grit." Clara stared out at the rain, her expression thoughtful. "I think it's honest," she said finally. "You can't fake a solid foundation. You can't pretend a wall is straight. When it isn't, everything here is real. It's either right or it's wrong. There's no in-between." Her words struck a chord with Leo. He'd never thought of his job that way, but she was right. It was a world of tangible truths, a world where your work spoke for itself. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the gray light, her eyes clear and serious, and he felt a sudden protective urge, a desire to shield her from the world of silver trays and empty expectations that she came from. He didn't know how or why, but he knew he wanted to keep this feeling, this quiet honesty, between them alive for as long as he could. As the weeks turned into a month, the line between their two worlds began to blur. A little Leo started looking forward to their lunches, more than he was willing to admit. He'd find himself smiling at something she said long after she'd gone back to her clipboard. And he started noticing the little things about her, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the small scar above her eyebrow that she never talked about, the fact that she always wore the same simple silver bracelet, no matter what else she had on one weekend. Leo had to come into the site to finish up some custom shelving for one of the penthouse units. He brought Maya with him. Promising her a trip to the park afterward, she sat in a corner of the vast empty room drawing in her sketchbook while he worked, her little tongue sticking out in concentration. He was so focused on his measurements that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a familiar voice said, "I had a feeling I might find you here." He turned to see Clara standing in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. She looked different away from the fine dust and grime of the worksite, softer, more vulnerable. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, who's that?" "Maya, this is my friend Clara," Leo said, his heart giving a strange little lurch at the word friend. "Clara, this is my daughter, Maya." Clara knelt down to Maya's level, her smile warm and genuine. "It's so nice to finally meet you. Your dad talks about you all the time." Maya beamed. "He does? He does?" Clara confirmed. He told me you're an amazing artist. I'd love to see your drawings sometime." Maya didn't hesitate. She flipped open her sketchbook and proudly showed off her latest creation, a blank, fierce-looking dragon with rainbow-colored scales. Clara studied it with the seriousness of an art critic. "Wow," she said. "That's incredible. You're not just an artist, you're a storyteller." Maya giggled, and for the next hour the three of them were in their own little world. Clara sat on the floor with Maya talking about dragons and magic and the best colors to use for fire. Leo worked nearby, listening to their easy chatter, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the sun streaming through the unfinished windows he watched. Clara interact with his daughter. How she listened intently to Maya's rambling stories. How she treated her not as a child to be entertained, but as a person to be respected, and he realized with a jolt that he was in trouble. This wasn't just a lunchtime friendship anymore, this was something more. Something that was starting to feel dangerously like hope, and hope was a risk he hadn't been willing to take in a very long time. The foreman Rick was a man who enjoyed the small pockets of power his position afforded him. He walked the site with a swagger, his hard hat tilted at a cocky angle, and his voice always a little too loud. He saw the world in a simple hierarchy of bosses and workers, and he treated everyone accordingly. Leo had been on the receiving end of Rick's casual condescension for years. He ignored it, letting his work speak for itself. But when it came to Clara, Rick's attitude shifted from dismissive to predatory. He saw to her as an easy target, a pretty intern from corporate who didn't know the ropes. He'd make comments just loud enough for her to hear, ask her to fetch him coffee with a smug smirk, or stand a little too close when he was explaining something on the blueprints. Leo watched it all with a slow burning anger, his hands often tightening around the handle of his hammer whenever Rick approached her. Clara, for her part, handled it with a cool grace that both impressed and worried Leo. She would meet Rick's smirks with a prosta, flat, unblinking stare and respond to his requests with a polite but firm, "I'm busy." She never complained, never raised her voice. She simply refused to give him the reaction he was looking for. But one afternoon, Rick pushed too far. He cornered Clara near the elevators where the noise was loudest and the witnesses fewest. Leo was working on a nearby doorway and saw the whole thing. Rick leaned in, closed his hand on the wall beside her head, blocking her path. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his voice laced with a slimy charm. "Don't be so cold. A little smile wouldn't kill you." Clara stood her ground, her jaw tight. "Move, Rick," she said, her voice low and steady. "I said move." That's when Leo stepped in. He didn't shout, he didn't make a scene, he just walked over and stood between them. His presence alone, a solid wall of quiet. "Warning, she asked you to move," Leo said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel that made Rick flinch. Rick straightened up his face, flushing with anger. "Stay out of this, Carpenter. This has nothing to do with you." "It does now," Leo replied, taking a step closer. "So I'm going to say this once. Leave her alone." The two men stared each other down for a long, tense moment, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Rick was bigger, but Leo had a look in his eyes that said he had nothing left to lose. Finally Rick scoffed and stepped back. "Fine, whatever, she's not worth the trouble." He shot a venomous glare at Clara. Before turning and stalking off, Leo watched him go, then turned to Clara, his anger slowly receding, replaced by concern. "You okay?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I'm fine. Thank you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, his voice softer now. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that." They stood there for a moment in the echoing space, the dust motes dancing in the air around them. In that instant, something shifted the lines between their worlds, blurred even further. He wasn't just the carpenter who shared his lunch anymore, and she wasn't just the mysterious intern. He had become her protector, and she had become something to him that was worth protecting. And that realization was both terrifying and thrilling. After the confrontation with Rick, a new kind of intimacy settled between Leo and Clara. It was unspoken but palpable. They didn't talk about what had happened, but it lingered in the way she looked at him now, with a trust that was both deep and a little fragile. Their lunches continued. But the conversations changed. They moved away from small talk and into the deeper territory of hopes and fears. He told her about his dream of one day starting his own small woodworking shop, a place where he could build custom furniture things with soul and character, not just anonymous drywall frames. He spoke of a life where he could set his own hours, be there for Maya after school, and work with his hands in a way that felt meaningful. It's a stupid dream, probably, he finished with a self-deprecating shrug. It's not stupid at all, Clara said, her voice fierce. It's beautiful. She then shared a piece of her own story, a rare glimpse behind the curtain of her guarded life. She told him about growing up in a house that felt more like a museum than a home where emotions were seen as a liability and success was measured in stock prices and public perception. I was raised to be an asset, not a person, she said, her eyes distant. I learned to be polished, to be perfect, to be whatever they needed me to be. I got so good at it. I forgot who I was when no one was watching. Leo listened, his heart aching for the little girl. She must have been lost in a world of cold marble and high expectations. So that's why you're here? He asked gently. To remember? She nodded. I wanted to see what it was like to be invisible for a while, to just be a person who fetches coffee and holds a clipboard. I wanted to see if there was anything left of me under all the layers. There is, he said without hesitation. I see it. Her eyes met his, and they were shining with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea how much that means to me. That day he packed up his lunchbox and walked her to the site's exit, a small gesture he'd never made before. As she was about to leave, she turned to him. Impulsively, Leo, would you and Maya want to come to the park with me on Saturday? We could get ice cream. His heart leaped, but his practical mind kicked in with a jolt of caution. He wanted to say yes more than anything, but the thought of stepping into her world, even for an afternoon at the park, felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he was ready for. I'll think about it, he said. But the look in his eyes told her he'd already said yes. Saturday arrived with a bright, cloudless sky, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a gift. Leo stood in front of his small, cracked bathroom mirror, trying to tame his hair with a comb that had a few teeth missing. He wore his best jeans, the ones without any paint stains, and a clean flannel shirt that he'd ironed that morning. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was just the park, he told himself. Just ice cream with a friend. But he knew it was more than that. It was a step into the unknown, a step toward a woman who was slowly but surely dismantling the walls he'd built around his heart. Maya was practically vibrating with excitement. She wore her favorite dress, the one with a pattern of tiny foxes, and she'd insisted on wearing her sparkly red shoes. Is Clara going to like my dress, Daddy? She asked, for the 10th time, as he packed a small bag with water and sunscreen. She's going to love it, sweetheart, he said, kissing the top of her head, just like she loves everything about you. They met Clara at the entrance to the city park. She was waiting on a bench, her hair down and catching the sunlight like threads of gold. She wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, but she still managed to look effortlessly elegant. She stood up when she saw them, her face breaking into a wide, genuine smile that made Leo's breath catch in his throat. You came, she set, her eyes on him. We did, he replied, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the sun. The afternoon was a blur of simple joys. They pushed Maya on the swings so high she shrieked with laughter, her little legs kicking at the sky. They fed stale bread to the ducks at the pond. Clara laughing as a particularly bold one nipped at her fingers. They bought ice cream from a cart and sat on a grassy hill, their shoulders brushing as they watched the clouds drift by. Leo watched Clara. With Maya. How she knelt down to tie Maya's shoe when it came undone. How she listened with rapt attention as Maya explained the intricate social hierarchy of the playground. How she held Maya's hand as they walked, not out of duty, but out of a genuine affection that was impossible to fake. He saw a side of her he hadn't seen before. Relaxed, playful, unguarded. She wasn't the mysterious intern or the corporate heiress. She was just Clara, a woman with a kind heart and a raw laugh. That made him want to be a better man. As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked back toward the parking lot. Maya was getting tired, her steps slowing, her head starting to droop without a word. Leo scooped her up into his arms, and she nestled her head against his shoulder, falling asleep almost instantly. Clara walked beside them, her expression soft and a little sad. "She's incredible," she whispered. "Yes, she is," Leo said, his voice thick with love. "She's my whole world." They reached Clara's car, a sleek but understated black sedan that still looked out of place next to Leo's beat-up minivan. She turned to him at the door, her smile a little hesitant. "I had a really good time today, Leo." "Me too," he said, meaning it more than he could say. "Thank you for inviting us." "Thank you for coming," she replied. She reached out and gently brushed a stray leaf from his shoulder, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second too long. The touch was electric, a jolt of connection that left them both a little breathless the moment. Stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, then she dropped her hand and stepped back. "I'll see you on Monday," she said. "Monday," he echoed, watching her get into her car and drive away. He stood there for a long time, holding his sleeping daughter in his arms, the scent of her ice cream and Clara's faint perfume mingling in the air. He knew he was standing on the edge of a cliff that, falling for her, would be reckless and dangerous, and could end in a world of hurt. But for the first time in a very long time he didn't care. He wanted to fall the following week. The atmosphere on the site was tense. The project was falling behind schedule, and the pressure from the top was palpable. Rick, the foreman, was more on edge than usual, his voice sharp and his patience thin. He seemed to take a particular pleasure in making Leo's life difficult, assigning him the most tedious and physically demanding tasks, and constantly checking his work with a critical eye. Leo ignored him as best he could, focusing on the job and the thought of his lunchtime escape with Clara. But even their quiet moments were tinged with the stress of the site. She seemed more withdrawn, her clipboard ever present, her eyes often clouded with a worry she wouldn't share. "Is everything okay?" he asked her one day as they sat on their drywall stack. "You?" seemed distracted. She forced a smile. "Just corporate stuff. Deadlines, budgets. The usual." He knew there was more to it, but he didn't press. One afternoon, Leo was tasked with installing a series of heavy oak panels. In the main lobby, it was a two-man job, but Rick had conveniently forgotten to assign him a partner. He was struggling to lift one of the panels into place, his muscles straining. When it slipped from his grasp, he tried to catch it. But it was too heavy. It fell with a sickening crash, one corner splintering against the concrete floor. "Brooks, what the hell was that?" Rick's voice boomed from across the lobby. He stomped over his face, a mask of fury. "Do you have any idea how much that panel costs? That's coming out of your paycheck." "It was an accident," Leo said, his jaw tight. "It wouldn't have happened if I'd had a partner." "Excuses, excuses," Rick sneered. "Maybe if you spent less time flirting with the intern and more time doing your job, this wouldn't have happened." Leo's hands clenched into fists. "Leave her out of this." "Oh, I? Bet you'd like that," Rick taunted, stepping closer. "What's the deal with you two anyway? You think a pretty little thing from upstairs is really interested in a grease monkey like you?" "She's just slumming it, Carpenter. She's probably laughing about you with her rich friends." That was it. The words hit a raw nerve. The one insecurity, Leo had been trying to ignore the fear that Rick was right, that he was just a temporary amusement for her. Before he could think, he lunged at Rick, shoving him hard against the wall. The foreman stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. "You're done, Brooks," he yelled, his voice cracking. "You're fired. Get your things and get off my site." Leo stood there, his chest heaving, his knuckles white. The world around him seemed to go silent. All he could hear was the echo of Rick's words, and the sound of his own hope shattering. He had just lost the one thing that was keeping him and Maya afloat, and it was all because he dared to believe he could be something more than what he was. He didn't see Clara, standing in the shadows of the hallway, her face pale, her eyes filled with a horrified understanding of what she had just witnessed. The walk to the foreman's trailer felt like the longest walk of Leo's life. His ears were ringing, and his hands were still shaking from the adrenaline and the anger he could feel. The eyes of the other workers on him, their whispers following him like a cloud of smoke. He was no longer Leo, the quiet carpenter. He was now Leo, the guy who got fired, the guy who snapped. He didn't even try to defend himself when Rick handed him his final paycheck and told him to be off the property in 10 minutes. What was the point? He'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. He gathered his tools in silence, his mind a numb blank. He packed his lunchbox, the empty container, a stark reminder of the simple joy he had lost. As he was walking toward the gate, a small figure blocked his path. It was Clara. Her face was etched with worry and guilt. "Leo, wait," she said, her voice urgent. "I saw what happened. It wasn't your fault. Rick was provoking you. I'll talk to him. I'll talk to someone in corporate. I can fix this." He looked at her, and a bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Fix it?" he said, his voice hollow. "You can't fix this, Clara. This is my life, my reality. You don't understand." "Then, help me understand," she pleaded, her eyes shining with tears. "Don't shut me out." "Why?" he shot back, his voice raw with pain. "So you can feel good about helping the poor carpenter? So you can tell your rich friends about your little project? Rick was right, wasn't he? This was all just a game to you." Her face fell, as if he had slapped her. "Leo, no. That's not true." "Isn't it?" he said, taking a step back, putting a physical distance between them. "Look at us, Clara. We're from different worlds. You're going to go back to your life of silver trays and boardrooms, and I'm going to go back to trying to figure out how to pay my rent. This was never going to work." He didn't want to hurt her. He really didn't, but he was hurting so much himself that the words spilled out like poison. He had to push her away. He had to protect what was left of his pride, even if it meant breaking his own heart in the process. "Goodbye, Clara," he said softly, and then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the construction site. Her name, a silent cry on her lips. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see the devastation in her eyes. The devastation that he had caused. Clara stood frozen, watching Leo walk away until he was just a small figure disappearing through the gate. His words echoed in her ears, each one a sharp shard of glass piercing her heart. "You don't understand. Your little project. This was never going to work." She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. He thought she was playing with him, slumming it for a thrill he didn't see her at all. He saw the caricature she had been. Trying so desperately to escape, tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. She had come to this place to find something real, and she'd found it in his quiet strength, in his unwavering love for his daughter, in the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world, and now she had lost it all because she had been too afraid to tell him the truth. Her first instinct was to run, to get in her car and drive away, to leave this whole mess behind and retreat to the cold, sterile comfort of her old life. But then she thought of Leo, of the desperation in his eyes, of the weight he carried on his shoulders, a weight that had just gotten infinitely heavier because of her. No, she couldn't run. She had to fix this, not for her own sake but for his. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her jaw set with a new determination. Rick had fired him. Rick, the smug bullying foreman who had been the cause of all this, she would start with him. She turned and marched toward the foreman's trailer, her work boots crunching on the gravel with a purpose they hadn't had before she didn't knock. She threw the door open. Rick was sitting at his desk, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He looked up, surprised. Well, if it isn't the little princess, what do you want?" "You're going to rehire him," she said, her voice cold, and even Rick laughed a short, ugly sound. "Not a chance. Carpenter boy is gone and he's not coming back." "Oh, he's coming back," Clara said, taking a step into the trailer, her eyes blazing with a fire Rick had never seen before. "And you're going to be the one to apologize to him." "And why would I do that?" He sneered, leaning back in his chair, his confidence unshaken. "Because if you don't," Clara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I will personally see to it that you never work on another construction site in this city or any other city for the rest of your life." Rick's smirk faltered. "You can't do that, you're just an intern." "Oh, Rick," she said, a slow, icy smile spreading across her face. "That's where you're wrong. I'm not an intern. I own this company. I own this building. I own you. And you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The color drained from Rick's face, his jaw dropping as he stared at her in stunned silence. He had no idea who he had been messing with, but he was about to find out. The drive home was a blur of self-recrimination and despair. Leo's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were white, his mind replaying the scene with Rick over and over again. The angry words, the shove, the look of triumph on the foreman's face. He'd let his anger get the best of him. And now he was paying the price. He thought about Maya waiting for him at home, her bright smile and her endless questions. How was he going to tell her that he'd lost his job? How was he going to explain that their already precarious world was about to crumble? He felt a wave of shame, so profound it was suffocating. He had failed her. He had failed himself. When he walked into his apartment, the first thing he saw was a drawing taped to the fridge. It was one of Maya's latest creations, a picture of him and Clara, standing on a grassy hill, holding hands under a smiling sun. The sight of it was a punch to the gut, a reminder of the hope he had dared to feel, a hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. He ripped the drawing off the fridge and crumpled it in his fist. The sound of the paper tearing was a small, violent echo of the tearing in his own heart. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a physical force. He didn't know what to do next, where to go. He had no savings, no prospects, no safety net. It was just him and Maya against the world, and the world felt like it was winning. He stayed like that for a long time, lost in a fog of misery, until he heard a soft knock on the door. He ignored it, hoping whoever it was would go away. But the knocking persisted, louder, more insistent, with a groan. He dragged himself to his feet and pulled the door open. His heart stopped. It was Clara. She stood on his doorstep, her face pale but resolute, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. "I came to tell you that you're not fired," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Rick is." He stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I own the company that's building that tower," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My name is Clara Ashton, as in Ashton Developments, and Rick was a liability I should have dealt with a long time ago. I'm so sorry, Leo. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to feel like a normal person for a while, and you made me feel that way." Leo was speechless. He couldn't process what she was saying. It was too much, too fast. His mind was reeling from the whiplash of emotions he had gone. From fired to vindicated, from hopeless to bewildered in the span of a few minutes. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived, and he saw not an heiress, not a boss, but a woman who was just as lost and vulnerable as he was. And in that moment, his anger and his pride melted away, leaving only a raw, aching empathy. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let her into his small apartment, into his broken world. The silence in the small apartment was thick with unspoken words and tangled emotions. Leo sat on one end of the worn couch, and Clara sat on the other. Chasm of misunderstanding and different worlds between them, he was still trying to wrap his head around her. Revelation. Ashton Developments was one of the biggest names in the city. Their logo was on half the buildings downtown. He'd been having lunch with a titan of industry, a woman whose net worth probably had more zeros than his phone number. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet she was here sitting in his tiny living room looking at him with an expression of such raw vulnerability that it broke his heart all over again. "So the intern thing was a lie," he said finally. Not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "It wasn't a lie. It was an experiment," she corrected softly. "I was tired of being surrounded by people who only saw my last name. I wanted to know what it felt like to be judged on my own merits or lack thereof." "And what did you find out?" he asked, his curiosity overriding his hurt. "I found out that I'm not very good at making my own lunch," she said with a faint smile. "And I found out that there are good, decent people in the world who work harder than anyone I've ever known and who have more integrity in their little finger than my entire board of directors." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I found you, Leo, and you were the most real thing that's happened to me in a very long time." His own eyes started to burn. "Clara, I said some things back there I didn't mean. You meant them in the moment," she said. "And you had every right to. I should have told you who I was from the beginning. But I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared you would look at me the way everyone else does," she whispered. "Like a bank account, a business opportunity, a headline. I just wanted to be Clara." "You were?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To me, you were always just Clara." He reached across the couch and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smooth ones. It was a simple touch, but it was a bridge. Across the chasm, a silent promise of forgiveness. A new beginning. Maya chose that moment to wander out of her room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes and clutching her favorite stuffed dragon. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes widening, when she saw Clara. "Clara!" she squealed, running over and throwing her arms around the woman's neck. "You came to our house!" Clara hugged her back tightly, burying her face in the little girl's hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of relief. And release. Leo watched them, a lump forming in his throat. He knew there were still 1,000 obstacles between them, 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work. But as he looked at the two most important people in his life huddled together on his worn-out couch, he knew he had to try. He had to fight for this fragile, impossible love, because it was the only thing that felt real in a world that had felt so wrong for so long. The next morning, Leo woke up to a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of lightness, a quiet hum of hope in his chest. The world outside his window was still the same. The bills on his table hadn't magically disappeared, and his car still made that weird rattling noise, but something fundamental had shifted inside him. He was no longer alone in his struggle. He had Clara. There went back to the construction site that day. Not as a fired carpenter, but as a man with a newfound sense of purpose. The news of Rick's dismissal had spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere was different. There was a palpable sense of relief among the crew. The other workers who had once looked at him with a mixture of pity and scorn, now nodded at him with a newfound respect. He was the man who had stood up to the bully, the man who had the backing of the big boss. He didn't revel in it, he just got to work, letting his craftsmanship speak for itself. As always, Clara was there too, but not as an intern. She arrived in a sleek black car that whispered of wealth and power, and she wore a tailored pantsuit that screamed authority. She walked the site with a team of executives, her voice confident and clear, as she pointed out flaws and demanded changes. But when she saw Leo, her professional mask would soften for just a moment, her eyes would meet his across the bustling site, and a silent message would pass between them, a promise, a shared secret, a quiet, "I see you." Their lunches continued, but the venue changed. They no longer huddled on a stack of drywall. They sat in Clara's temporary office in one of the site's trailers. A space that was clean and quiet and private. She would bring them food from fancy downtown restaurants, salads with ingredients he couldn't pronounce, sandwiches on artisanal bread that cost more than his entire weekly grocery budget, but he would still bring his leftovers, his stews, his spaghetti, his simple, humble meals, and she would always choose to share his container. Her fork clinking against his as they ate in comfortable silence. They were a strange pair, the billionaire and the carpenter, a modern-day fairy tale that the gossip columns would have a field day with if they ever found out. But in their little trailer office they weren't their titles, they were just Leo and Clara, two people from different worlds who had found a common ground in their shared loneliness and their mutual respect. As the days turned into weeks, their connection deepened. They started spending time together outside of work. Clara would come over to his apartment for dinner, and she and Maya would have drawing contests on the living room floor. They would go for walks in the park, and he would teach her the names of the trees, a knowledge passed down from his own father. She would tell him about her world of cutthroat negotiations and empty victories, a world he couldn't imagine but was beginning to understand through her eyes. He learned that her wealth was as much a prison as it was a privilege. And she learned that his poverty had forged a strength and a character that no amount of money could buy. They were falling in love, slowly, carefully, and with the full knowledge that their worlds were on a collision course. But for now they were content to live in the quiet space they had created, a fragile bubble of hope in the heart of a city that didn't know they existed. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Leo was at home getting Maya ready for school when his phone buzzed with a notification from a local news app. He glanced at it and his blood ran cold. The headline was stark and sensational: Ashton heiress's secret romance with construction worker. A photo accompanied the article, a grainy long-lens shot of him and Clara laughing together on their bench at the park. It was a private moment, a stolen piece of their happiness now plastered on the internet for the whole world to see. His hands started to shake. He clicked on the article and the words blurred together. Clara Ashton, the reclusive billionaire behind Ashton Developments, has been spotted in a series of clandestine meetings with a clandestine meetings blue-collar worker from one of her own construction sites. Sources say the unlikely pair have been carrying on a secret affair for weeks. Is this a modern-day Cinderella story, or is the powerful heiress just looking for a temporary diversion? The article was filled with innuendo and speculation, painting him as a gold digger and her as a flighty rich girl playing with a new toy. It was a twisted, distorted version of their reality, and it made him feel sick to his stomach. His phone started ringing, almost immediately. Friends, family, reporters. He ignored them all. He sank onto the couch, his mind reeling. He had known this was a possibility. He had known their bubble couldn't last forever, but he wasn't prepared for the brutal reality of it, for the way it stripped them of their privacy and turned their fragile love into a public spectacle. He thought about Maya. How would he protect her from this? How would he explain the whispers and the stares that were sure to follow? He felt a familiar wave of despair wash over him, the same hopelessness he'd felt when he'd been fired. It was all too much. He was out of his depth, a small fish in a shark-infested ocean. He loved Clara. He loved her with a depth and a passion that scared him, but he didn't know if their love was strong enough to withstand the storm that was about to break. He heard a key in the lock and the door opened. It was Clara. She was holding a copy of the morning paper, her face pale, and her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear. "Leo, I am so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how they found out." He didn't answer. He just looked at her, the woman he loved, the woman who had brought so much joy and so much chaos into his life. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of all the things he was afraid to say. The media storm was relentless. Reporters camped outside his apartment building. Photographers followed him on his way to drop Maya off at school. His life, too, had become a reality show, and he was the unwilling star. The narrative was always the same: the hard-working single dad swept off his feet by the glamorous billionaire. It was a story that sold papers and generated clicks, but it was a lie. It didn't capture the quiet moments, the shared lunches, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. The story they were telling wasn't his, it wasn't theirs. Clara tried to manage the fallout. She hired a team of high-powered publicists and lawyers who issued stern, no-comment statements and threatened lawsuits, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The more they pushed back, the more the media dug in. They unearthed details about his past, his financial struggles, his wife's death. It was all laid bare for public consumption, a feast for the public. Vultures, he felt violated, exposed and angry. He started to withdraw from Clara, not because he blamed her, but because he didn't know how to be with her in the middle of this circus. Their quiet moments were gone, replaced by hushed phone calls and furtive meetings. He felt like he was losing her. Losing himself. One afternoon, he came home to find a crowd of reporters blocking the entrance to his building. They swarmed him as he got out of his car, shouting questions and shoving microphones in his face. "Leo, is it true that Clara Ashton is paying your rent? Are you planning to marry her for her money? What does your daughter think of her father's new sugar mama?" He pushed his way through them, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. He managed to get inside and slam the door behind him. His heart pounding in his chest, he leaned against the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't a life he could live. He wouldn't let Maya grow up in this kind of toxic environment. When Clara came over that evening, he had made his decision. He was sitting in the dark. When she let herself in with the key he had given her, she looked tired and defeated. Her professional armor chipped and cracked. "Leo, I'm working on it," she said. "I'll make it go away." "You can't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is your world, Clara, not mine, and I don't belong in it." "Don't say that," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "We belong together." "Do we?" he asked, standing up and facing her. "Look at what's happening. We can't even go for a walk in the park without it becoming a headline. Maya is scared to go to school. I'm being portrayed as some kind of pathetic charity. Case this isn't love, Clara. It's a spectacle." "So what are you saying?" She whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm saying it's over," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I can't do this anymore. I need to protect my daughter. I need to protect myself." "Leo, please," she sobbed, reaching for him. "Don't do this." He stepped back, his heart shattering into a million pieces. "I have to," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's the only way." He walked her to the door and watched her leave, her shoulders slumped in defeat. He closed the door and slid to the floor, the silence of the apartment. Pressing in on him, he had just pushed away the best thing that had ever happened to him, and the pain was unbearable. But he had to believe he had done the right thing. He had to believe that sometimes love meant letting go the days that followed. The breakup were a gray, monotonous blur. Leo went through the motions of life. He got up, he took Maya to school, he went to work, but the color had been drained from his world. He felt like a ghost, haunting his own life. The construction site was a constant reminder of Clara. Her presence lingered in the trailer office, in the spot where they used to eat lunch, in the very bones of the building he was helping to create. He tried to hate her, he tried to be angry, but all he felt was a profound and aching loss. He missed her laugh, he missed her quiet strength, he missed the way she made him feel seen and understood. He missed her. Maya was quiet too. She didn't ask about Clara, but he could see the sadness in her eyes. She would draw pictures of the three of them, and hide them under her bed, as if she was afraid he would see them and be sad. One evening he found her sitting on her bed, staring at a crumpled piece of paper. It was the drawing he had ripped off the fridge, the one of him and Clara holding hands. She had smoothed it out and tried to tape it back together, the jagged tear a visible scar across their happy faces. "I miss her, Daddy," she said, her voice a small whisper. "Me too, sweetheart," he said, sitting down beside her and pulling her into a hug. "Me too." That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind a whirlwind of memories and regrets. He had let his pride and his fear dictate his actions. He had pushed Clara away because he was afraid of being hurt, of being seen as weak. But in doing so, he had hurt them both. He had chosen the safety of his old lonely life over the terrifying, beautiful possibility of a new one. And he realized with a clarity that was both painful and liberating that he had made a mistake. A terrible mistake. He loved Clara Ashton, and he wasn't going to let her go without a fight. He didn't care about the media, the money, the different worlds. He only cared about her. He had to get her back. He had to tell her that a life without her wasn't a life at all. He got out of bed and started to pack a small bag. He didn't know where he was going, or what he would say, but he knew he had to try. He had to find her, and tell her that he was ready to face the storm as long as she was by his side. Clara sat in the sterile silence of her penthouse apartment, a glass of untouched wine on the marble coffee table beside her. The city lights twinkled below a glittering carpet of a world she no longer felt a part of. She had retreated to her fortress, her gilded cage after Leo had broken up with her. She had shut out the world, the media, her family, her friends. She had let the silence envelop her, hoping it would numb the pain, but it didn't. It only amplified it. Her apartment was filled with priceless art and designer furniture, but it was empty of warmth, of laughter, of love. It was a reflection of the life she had built for herself, a life that was beautiful on the outside but hollow on the inside. Leo had filled that hollowness. He and Maya had brought a chaotic, messy, beautiful reality into her life. And now that they were gone, the emptiness was unbearable. She had tried to move on, to go back to being Clara Ashton, the formidable CEO, but the role no longer fit. She would sit in board meetings, her mind drifting to a dusty construction site and a man with kind eyes and calloused hands. She would look at spreadsheets and see Maya's dragon drawings. She had lost her taste for the world of silver trays and empty victories. She only wanted a thermos of bad coffee and a plate of leftover spaghetti. A knock on the door startled her out of her reverie. She wasn't expecting anyone. She ignored it, but the knocking persisted, firm and insistent, with a sigh. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. Her heart stopped. It was Leo. He stood in the hallway looking tired and rumpled, but his eyes were shining with a fierce determination she had never seen before. She opened the door slowly, her hand trembling. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "I made a mistake," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "A huge, stupid mistake. I was scared, and I was proud, and I let that get in the way of the best thing that's ever happened to me." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Clara. I love everything about you. Your strength, your kindness, your terrible taste in coffee. I don't care about the money or the media or the fact that we're from different worlds. None of that matters. All that matters is that I can't live without you." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. "Leo, I love you too," she whispered. "I've been so lost without you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that was filled with all the words they hadn't said, all the pain they had endured, and all the pain they had endured. Hope they had for the future. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of a new beginning, a testament to the power of a love that was strong enough to bridge any divide, to conquer any storm. They stood there in the doorway of her penthouse, a carpenter and a billionaire, Two people who had found each other against all odds. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, that their love would be tested again and again, but as they held each other tight, they knew they could face anything. As long as they were together, their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And it was just beginning. The wedding was a small, private affair, held in the lush garden of Clara's family estate. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, no headlines. Just a small gathering of their closest friends and family. Maya was the flower girl, her eyes shining with a happiness that was contagious. She scattered rose petals down the aisle, with a joyful abandon that made everyone smile. Leo stood at the altar, his heart so full he thought it might burst. He watched Clara walk toward him, a vision in a simple white dress, her face glowing with a love that was so pure and so powerful, it took his breath away. They exchanged vows. They had written themselves, words that spoke of their journey, of their struggles, and of their unwavering commitment to each other. It was a ceremony filled with laughter, tears, and a profound sense of gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought them together. After the wedding, they didn't move into Clara's penthouse or Leo's small apartment. They bought a house together, a cozy, rambling home in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a big backyard for Maya to play in and a workshop for Leo to build his dreams. They blended their worlds with a careful and loving touch. Clara brought her elegance and her impeccable taste, and Leo brought his warmth, his practicality, and his handcrafted furniture. Their home was a reflection of their love, a beautiful and harmonious blend of two very different worlds. Clara stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Ashton Developments. She promoted a talented and deserving woman from within to take her place as CEO, and she took on a new role as the head of the company's charitable foundation. She used her wealth and her influence to make a real difference in the world, funding affordable housing projects and educational programs for underprivileged children. She had found a purpose that was more fulfilling than any business deal. Leo started his own woodworking shop in the garage of their new home. He built custom furniture pieces that were works of art. His reputation grew, and soon he had a waiting list of clients who appreciated his craftsmanship and his integrity. He was doing what he loved on his own terms, and he had never been happier. They were a family, a strange and wonderful and unlikely family. They had their challenges, their disagreements, their moments of doubt, but they faced them together, with love and with laughter. They had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in money or possessions, but in the richness of their relationships and the depth of their love. One sunny afternoon, Leo and Clara were sitting on their back porch, watching Maya play on the swing set Leo had built for her. He was sipping a beer and she was drinking a glass of iced tea. Comfortable silence settled between them, a silence born of a deep and abiding love. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked her. "Your old life?" She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Not for a second," she said. "I have everything I've ever wanted, right here." He kissed the top of her head and pulled her closer, his heart overflowing with a love so big and so real. It felt like a miracle, and as the sun set on another perfect day, he knew that their happily ever after was just beginning.